is enough for a ton of prepared sake. A ton. Look at this much. Fifth ingredient, which is rare, but sometimes happens. Not rare, but some brewers choose to use a fifth ingredient. It's brewer's alcohol, usually distilled from sugar cane or rice. They add it in a very minute quantity in the later stages of fermentation to allow the yeast cells to release additional aromatics or to balance the sake out. It's diluted back down. So when they add in that fifth ingredient, it doesn't change the quality. It doesn't change the alcohol content. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is done. And we'll go over why or how you can identify that in the classifications we go over in just a little while. Which brings us to the brewing process. Do you have any questions about the ingredients before I move on? I'll take like one or two only. No? Okay, I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to start here.
One of the ingredients, why do you over-define red sake?
He asked why you don't usually see red sake here. You do, there's about 3 labels you can find in the United States that are red sake. They're very, very earthy and very, very gamey. It's a very specific flavor palette that doesn't usually appeal to a mass audience, so it's not real common. But you can find them here in the United States. I think there's one curated through sake.com, I think. And, with the wrong heels for this. You cannot use cherry blossoms or peaches in sake, however, you can alter sake after the fact with both of those things. All right, beginning. The brewing process. We're going to do a very brief overview of fermentation. At the bottom, you have basic fermentation. Wine is the best example of that. You have a grape, and contained within that grape, you have moisture and sugar, right? 2 very important things for fermentation. And on the outside, you have yeast cells that occur naturally on that grape. And if you put a bunch of grapes in a bucket and you leave it there for a while, what you're going to end up with is a bucket that at least some point out in the sun on a warm day is wine, is only for 1 minute. Naturally, it ferments, and that will happen. Rice will not do this, okay? Do not leave a bucket of rice in the sun and get sake. There's no water, well, there's a little bit of water inside, but not nearly enough. It's not naturally occurring yeast in the concentrations you would need. What you have instead is 2 processes, something known as a bilateral or multiple parallel fermentation. So what you have is sake rice. And we have koji that acts on that sake rice to convert the carbohydrate starches into sugars. And at the exact same time, in the exact same tank, you have yeast eating that sugar and converting it to alcohol. A byproduct of any fermentation process is alcohol, CO2, so you get bubbles, there's gas, and you get heat. Okay, and as we go forward, we'll see how they deal with all of those things. Harvest. Rice is harvested in the fall. It can be September, it can be October. I've even seen fields harvested in November, though it's rare. Once it's harvested, the rice is kind of heavy. The grains are soaked up a lot of water through the season, so it's let to sit and rest and dry out for a little bit. Once it's dry enough to work with and firm enough, they're going to mill the rice. Okay? It's put into a machine where these giant wheels spin it around against itself, and they mill the outside of the rice away. Why would we want to mill the outside of the rice away? Right, to get to the little cloud, the shimpaku in the middle, because that's the best part for making sake. It's going to remove those excess fats, those proteins, those amino acids, and it's going to get you closer and closer to the good stuff. However, all of that friction creates a tremendous amount of heat, and the rice gets very, very fragile. Okay, so after it's done being milled, you want to let it rest again, reabsorb a little bit of moisture out of the air, and then it's ready to use for making sake. Which brings us to washing and soaking the rice. Rice is washed either by machine or by hand. It depends on what they're trying to do and how much they're trying to produce. This removes what's known as the nuka, or the powder, that rice flour that sticks to the outside of the rice. You don't want nuka in a batch of rice, okay, for making sake. So you're going to remove that. You're going to wash it, and then what's going to happen is it's going to move from there to being soaked. Usually in the same area, although larger breweries go from one machine to another, it could be in another room. Generally it's in the same area and it happens at the same time. They're going to soak the rice for just a couple minutes to allow it to absorb just a bit of water. Okay, just a bit, not a lot. And every time rice comes in contact with water, it's going to absorb some. But you don't want to give it too much. Be very particular about how much, what percentage they allow it to do. And that also is based heavily on how much it's been milled down. because it's going to absorb faster or slower depending on how much rice is left. Then they're going to steam the rice. Now we're not steaming this rice so you can eat it like Uncle Ben's or make sushi out of it like we're going to have later tonight at the after party. What they're going to do is they're going to steam it long enough so that it's still firm on the outside and the inside is a little bit soft and a little bit gooey. Okay? The starches in the middle convert and the outside structure becomes a tiny bit porous. And you'll see why. Because after steaming, about 15% of the rice, it has to be pulled off. Usually that's done on a conveyor belt with cool air blowing on it, so it's very, very consistent. And once it's pulled, 15% of it can be taken to the koji room, or the koji Soto. And in the koji room, they're going to infect rice with koji kin. Okay? I say infect, it doesn't sound like a pretty word, but it's a pretty accurate description of what's going on. What they're going to do is they're going to have giant tables in this warm, 90 degrees, 70% humidity, very warm, very hot room, right? And they're going to spread out this long piece of fabric, kind of like canvas, right? And they're going to cover it with rice, but it's still quite warm usually, not super warm, but you can still feel the warmth in it. And they're going to pull through and make it all one level, break up any clumps that are there, and then they're going to sprinkle it with koji kin. And what's going to happen is the koji is going to start eating right away. They're going to eat that starch, and it's going to start leaving sugar behind. Now the reason we want a porous structure of rice is because the most starch is where? It's in the It's in the shimpaku. So that porous structure, the koji has to struggle to get into there, so it's going to coat the entire grain. You need more sugar. It's going to turn the best stuff into all sugar, right? And that's what you want. More sugars, more alcohol, better production. Yes, they actually dress like that because it's 90 degrees and 70% humidity. Not everywhere, but in some breweries they do. They're going to wrap it up after they've sprinkled it. They're going to wrap it up and wrap it up and wrap it up. And they're going to tighten it up inside of a canvas sort of, like baggie. It looks kind of like that giant bag that had Dumbo in it when it got dropped off the day it was born. It's about like that. And what's going to happen is for the next 24 hours, it can be checked every 2 hours. Okay? The koji in charge of that batch is going to wake up in the middle of the night to check it. They're going to get up over and over again. It's exhausting work. And this can happen for an entire koji season. Okay? It's very, very hard work. They're going to check it for temperature. They're going to check to make sure that the koji is spreading consistently. They're going to see if they need to make any adjustments. And then on day 2, they're going to spread it back out. They're going to break up any clumps. They can do this by hand or by machine. And they're going to move it into smaller trays and let the koji keep doing its work. Okay? And when it's done, koji looks a little bit like white cheddar popcorn, kind of. That's what it looks like. And it has a taste. When it's ready to be used, it tastes a little bit like really ripe cantaloupe juice, sour green apple rind, and that powder that's left behind in those metal dentine wrappers, all mixed together. And when you taste that, and all of those things all at one time, then you know it's done. At which point, they're going to move over and start the yeast starter. For anyone that was in my whiskey class last night, we talked a little bit about starters. It's the same thing. It's a kickstarter for fermentation. So what they're going to do is they're going to take a tank. Sometimes it's a big tank, big being maybe, and about yay big, right? And they're going to add in rice, water, and from here on out, koji. When I say koji, is koji infected rice. So you're going to have regular rice, water, koji infected rice, and usually we'll add in a little bit of acid, lactic acid, and some yeast. But not everybody adds the yeast. As I mentioned earlier, some people let it fall naturally from the environment. Okay? And what the purpose of this starter is to give the yeast cells a fighting chance. It gives them lots to eat, lots and lots of sugar. The koji's there converting more starch to sugar, right? And somewhere along the way, the yeast cells can build up a high enough concentration to get to a point where they can survive the transfer to a larger tank without much risk. Okay? And they're a living thing. It's an organism at this point. It takes about 2 weeks, but if the yeast falls in naturally, it takes about 4. Now, as I mentioned, whenever you have fermentation, you have a heat release. And heat can be detrimental because it can kill the yeast cells, right? So they have to control it. This is a very, very fancy method of temperature control. That's a bag of snow. Very fancy. Here's what they've got. You know, in larger breweries, they have machines that are very, very good at keeping it cold at constant temperatures and insulation. But in smaller breweries, a bag of ice will do. Just walk outside and fill it with snow. There's a bag of ice on the outside of a tank, controlling the temperature. Right? Once it's got enough a high enough concentration of yeast cells, they're going to move it to a larger tank. And when I say large, I mean a large tank. Maybe you could fit 5 of them in this room. They're 2 stories high. Because when I'm in this room, I'm looking down from the 3rd floor into the top of the tank. And what's going to happen is they're going to move the starter batch in. Then on the first day, they're going to add more rice, more water, more koji, okay? And what's going to happen is then on the second day, they're going to do nothing. That's called the Odori, or the Danjanjakomi, which means the dancing day. And I, in my gaijin, my first trip to Japan, asked the gentleman who was giving us the tour, well, why did they call it the dancing day? And he says, you know, so the yeast cells can dance, so they can procreate. They give them a day to catch up on what they've been lacking and rebuild their numbers up. And then on the 3rd day, they add, and on the 4th day, they add. So there are 3 additions over 4 days. And they're going to watch it. They're going to watch it ferment. They're going to test it constantly. They're going to test the pH balance. They're going to test the alcohol content. They're going to test the acidity. They're going to test for temperature. They're going to test the alcohol content at a certain point. They're going to test the SNV index, which is a dryness scale. Very fancy way of saying how dry it is, right? And they're going to check it for anywhere from, I've seen it as short as 20 days to as long as I've seen it 45 days, okay? Usually 25 to 40 is pretty average. This is an example of a foaming yeast. It makes bubbles, and it's going to bubble up and bubble up and bubble up because it creates that CO2, and there's bindings in these yeast rings that allow that to happen. And so they have to constantly be beating the bubbles down and beating the bubbles down and beating the bubbles down. This is what happens to it. Bubbles, bubbles, bubbles. Now, there's good things about these bubbles. It creates a layer of insulation, so there's a good, consistent creation there. They think that the CO2 can be very, very good for keeping out oxygen and anything they don't want in there, right? No bugs or anything like that. But it's a lot of manpower, and every once in a while, those little egg beaters that keep those bubbles down stop working. I was privy to that one year. It was super. There was absolutely everywhere. This is an example of a non-foaming yeast. Anything that ends in 01, this is 1401, is a non-foaming yeast, and they don't have to have those egg beaters that are watching it. It's less manpower. As you can see when you look at the sheet over here, they're checking it every day, several times a day, making notes on anything that's changed, anything they want the next crew to watch if there's a next crew, which is a bigger facility, and they know what to follow up on in the lab. On a board like this, they can check 6 or 7 batches at one time. I apologize. Most of us aren't used to reading right to left, top to bottom that way, but that's what's going on here, day 1 through day 31. And then when the fermentation is complete, a couple different things can happen. So everything that happens right now is going to happen in different orders. Every brewery has a preference, okay? The sake is going to be pressed at a certain point, okay? And there's different ways to press it. This is called an Otakon machine. It's the most common way, almost everybody does it. As a matter of fact, the brewery that sponsored like bandanas and all the sake we're having later tonight had a big hand in inventing this machine. And what it is it's like a giant accordion, and there's all these slats down the middle of it. It used to be made out of rubber, without putting impurities in sake, so now they're made out of silicone, right? And what it does is it smushes it, and smushes it, and smushes it on that hydraulic arm. And as it smushes it, the solids get caught, and the juice comes out, okay? Solids get caught, and the juice comes out. And you can get pretty much everything you can squeeze out of sake in this pressing method. Other methods can involve, I wish I had a picture, let's see, well, this is the gravity press, okay? You put it in and it's smushed from above. It's an older style of pressing. It's not used very commonly anymore. And then there's the Shizuku press, which I don't have a photo of you, and I'm sorry, but basically what it is hanging sake in linen bags, and there's free run that comes off of it. It's very, very delicate, very, very beautiful. Unfortunately, 90% less yield, very, very expensive. But it's very delicate. It's fantastic sake. So if you ever get to have Shizuku sake, I highly recommend it. Dilution, pasteurization. pasteurization. These things happen in different orders depending on where you are, but generally speaking, sake has a naturally occurring alcohol content somewhere between 18 and 21%, which I think is what most people think of as the final product. I think a lot of people think sake is really high in alcohol. It's more like a spirit. But they actually dilute it down, almost always to 15.5, 16%. Sometimes 17, not that common. Yes. Oh, sorry, thank you. So it's going to be diluted and then it's going to be pasteurized. All right. Pasteurization, the first pasteurization usually happens by water. So it goes through a pipe, it runs through hot water, kills off any bacteria that are still alive in this living, breathing organism, right? And then it's put to store, and they're going to store it, and they're going to store it. Yes?
Without being diluted, how much is it normally at?
18 to 21%.
Oh,
That's naturally occurring. They dilute it down to 15.5. Yeah. Alright, so after they do the first pasteurization, usually it's going to go back to a storage tank. Generally, it hasn't been diluted yet. Usually it's right after this, but it could have been diluted already. It's going to sit in that storage tank for anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months, even a year. It depends on what the brewer thinks is important. Depends on what the brewer thinks, the time it needs, and when he thinks it's ready to go to market. But when it comes out of the tank and it goes to bottling, generally it will be pasteurized again. Now, pasteurization involves putting heat to this sake, right? And heat is the enemy of all alcohol, heat and light, okay? And so what you want to do is get it hot, kill the bacteria, and get it cold as fast as possible. And it's always the goal of any process, okay? There are some cases where sake is not pasteurized. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. But for the most part, sake is pasteurized twice. They usually bottle and label at the same time, and then it goes to storage. Yes?